Okay, I think we're ready to open the hearing for 255 Merriam Street, flexible subdivision plan. And Pat, you had your hand up earlier. If you
Yes,
could
I
just
did.
identify
My
yourself.
lawyers advised me to make a public statement and make sure that Betsy puts it in the public record. And that is that according to the flexible subdivision bylaw, this property does not qualify in any way. And that the planning board has the right and should, as well as I have the right and my neighbors, to say that they are, no one is allowed to have a waiver from it.
Thank you. Well, we're not looking at a presentation tonight. Actually, the planning board received a proposal from the property owners last week, dated November 24th, in response to in response to the design guidelines that the planning board sent to the property owners earlier. I think the way to approach this is to say, is for the board members to express our response and reaction to the property owner's proposal. So I'll lead off with that. The review of a flexible subdivision has two parts. The first part is the review of the subdivision plan. Actually, it's usually a density plan, but in this case, it's an actual subdivision plan because the applicant hasn't taken advantage of the frontage bonus that applies with density development plans. So our job is, first of all, to look at the subdivision plan, and then at the flexible development plan. The purpose of the subdivision plan is to demonstrate that the property meets the town's subdivision rules and regulations, and if that's the case, then we move on to an evaluation of whether the flexible subdivision plan has benefits that an ordinary subdivision wouldn't have. Subdivision rules and regulations, just for a minute, are intended, based on many years of experience, to encourage a rational and reasonable subdivision of land based on certain criteria. And for the most part, they work that way. The planning board has a little, and I think it's only a little, latitude in its ability to grant waivers from rules and regulations that seem appropriate for a particular set of conditions. In this instance, the subdivision plan that has been presented to us depends on a cul-de-sac right at the intersection with Merriam Street. It requires a waiver from the planning board in order to be declared compliant with the town's rules and regulations. I personally don't necessarily agree with the argument that because a waiver is commonly granted for a standard requirement, that the planning board must always, therefore, grant the waiver. Because that then makes the waiver essentially null. and it makes the the feature that would be granted the waiver part of the rules and regulations. In this case, we'd have to grant the waiver for the cul-de-sac right at Merriam Street in order to make the subdivision plan work geometrically. You can talk about whether it works in the real world, and you could discuss whether the resulting lots are actually marketable or even buildable. But I don't think the objective of the planning board rules and regulations is to enable the kind of tortured subdivision that results from the waiver that would be required by this subdivision plan. That's number one. So that if this were presented to us as a subdivision plan, not related to a flexible development submission, I would not grant the waiver to enable this subdivision to go forward. Apart from the geometric issues, I think the result would be tremendously injurious to the neighborhood. And the whole purpose of planning is to try and make as much as possible developments compatible with the neighborhood. So if this comes before us as a subdivision, I would have to deny the waiver. That said, if this is a theoretical plan that is the gateway to a flexible subdivision, I would be amenable to granting the waiver if the subdivision met criteria that I think would make the subdivision compatible with the neighborhood. And for me, the two features that I think are most important are, first of all, that the existing house be preserved, and not for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, a permanent preservation of the house. That's number one. And number two, that the new house not be visible from the street or the abutters. That it be subordinate to the existing house in terms of size and scale, and that it not intrude into the viewscape of the existing viewscape. Those are my two basic criteria. That said, I have an issue with the proposal in that it limits the preservation of the house to no more than 20 years, and it limits the site planning to the October the 3rd site plan submittal, which I don't think adequately screens the new building from the street and the abutters. So, and there are other issues with respect to the house size and so forth that I also have an issue with. So my problem personally is this. We've worked for a long time and very hard to try to come to some sort of a meeting of the minds on this project. And it doesn't appear that at least to me, that we're making any progress. We just seem to be talking at cross purposes. And so I'm having, and I appreciate the work and the effort that has gone into this on the part of the owner. And I would also acknowledge that the planning board, we ourselves have spent a lot of time and effort trying to make this work. And I'm just not seeing the progress. And I'm wondering if we're beating a dead horse. So those are my comments. Other members, anyone else want to weigh in?
Well, I agree with the proposal lays out two non-negotiables, as you pointed out. And those non-negotiables are the deed restriction, which we talked about 2 months ago when we had the last hearing, and the size of the house in the rear, as well as obviously setting it to that October 3rd site plan. There were other comments that in the proposal too. The idea, for example, that other subdivisions didn't have deed restrictions, historic deed restrictions placed, when in fact there are many examples of properties that have these.
In Weston?
Yes, in Weston. And I agree, what we have been trying to winnow down is some way forward here. But I think there are major obstacles, and I think we've reached an impasse. And so frankly, we've had a half dozen meetings about this. It's lingered, and I don't see us getting to where we need to come to agreement between parties. So I want to move that we deny the waiver for the definitive subdivision for 255, Merriam.
I second the motion.
Okay. In that case, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Well, there's no need for us to go on the record then. I certainly disagree with your statement that this is a different two-lot subdivision than all the other two-lot subdivisions you've passed. I haven't heard any explanation as to why, this particular two-lot cul-de-sac falls, short of what you approved in other two-lot cul-de-sacs. But if you voted, so I'm not going to try to change your mind tonight. We'll decide where we go from there. But, as you saw in Mr. Myers and Ms. Bybee's letter, I don't think the status quo is going to remain on this site. But what you're saying tonight is, one, you're not going to grant the waiver for a flexible. And yes, my clients have said that the permanent preservation restriction is unacceptable.
Well, I think you misunderstood, Jonathan. I think we voted to deny the waiver on the density determination.
Yeah.
Okay.
What did I say? I'm sorry.
You said the flexible.
Yeah, the waiver necessary to proceed with a flexible. You're not giving a waiver on the density determination plan. You're saying that you would have denied this as a conventional subdivision. I'm not, to use your words out, would be a tortured subdivision, and therefore you're not going to, you would never, whether it's a preliminary, where it's a conventional subdivision plan or a density determination plan, in either instance, you would not approve it. That's what I'm hearing tonight. And, we discussed, it's too bad we spent this long, because probably 5 hearings ago, we went beyond the density determination and on to the proposal.
Jonathan, I'm speaking personally, I kept hoping that we could get,
Just wasn't enough movement.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the proposed options, it says that there are 2 immutable parameters, and both of those parameters are the most important things to us, because I agree 100% with Al. One is that the existing house has to have a preservation restriction in perpetuity. And by getting that, you could be compensated for the difference in the market value between a house that has such a deed restriction and one that doesn't, which none of this acknowledges. And the other thing is that the proposed house behind it, be invisible. And in order to make it invisible, it has to be a certain size and a certain height, and surrounded by lots of landscaping so that nobody can see it. And both of these immutable parameters, frankly, I find the whole tone of this document somewhat threatening.
Is that a new standard for the board? I'm familiar with screened from adjacent properties. Is it now on these site plan approvals and flexibles that they have to be invisible to
it's not a
adjacent
standard.
property?
Listen, Jonathan.
I'm just seizing on that word.
I've driven by this site
Yeah.
at least 250 times. I've
Mhm.
looked at it in every season of the year.
Mhm.
A house right sitting behind this existing house, or whatever
Mhm.
is in the front yard, is going to loom and I speak by the way, as an architect and a land planner, so this isn't my first rodeo. I can picture exactly what that house is going to look like. And under those, we have to judge by the impacts of the individual properties we're looking at. I think you would agree with that. It's not a standard. We don't standardly say the house has to be invisible, but in this instance, where the impact would be, the visual impact, in my professional opinion, would be so strong, we would look for mitigators that would ameliorate that impact. That's what we're saying.
And the mitigators are more than just the height, because the mitigators you're proposing are the RGFA as well. Even though theoretically, I presume a ranch house could be invisible, but they don't want to build a ranch house. But I'm just pointing out that it's more than just the height, which is what would make it jump out, because the proposal has that house screened from the street where it's not already screened by the existing house.
Right, and these are all discussions that we've been trying to have now for, at least, that's my view, that we've actually been trying to communicate. Maybe we haven't articulated
Well, no,
them
the screening
well enough for you.
The screening, her statement on the screening, probably went too far. The screening is always flexible, but yeah, I'm told by my clients, the RGFA and the permanent restriction are just non-starters. Of course, I'm speaking for you, Jane, is that correct?
When you compare the other things that we could do with this property to what we were offered in the draft, if we did what you offered in the draft, we would actually be negative $200,000. It isn't feasible to do it that way, and there are other alternatives for what can go back there. And I think it's probably not realistic to think that it's not going to be left undeveloped permanently. It's 2.5 acres of prime land. And there are other things that could be done, a larger house, 40B, the list goes on and on, of things that would not go through the planning board. And I think that...
It would though. It's a scenic road.
Yeah, and she knows that. I picked that up on the letter, and she knows
Whatever happens there.
it goes through you.
But a lot of the things that would happen there, I think that in terms of what would have benefited the neighbors about that plan, is that we had pushed it as far away as possible to Barbara. You had 80 to 90% of the woods remaining for the people that wanted the woods. The house, wasn't very much topological change at all. The houses were not going to be pushed up against the abutters. And when you go through, and Roy has said many times what the directives are to the planning board of what you're trying to minimize, I think that under any development scheme, that what you saw that's up there is the most favorable to all of you. And that when it comes time and you see a different proposal before you, don't come to me and say, oh my gosh, how could this happen? Because you knew. And I think we tried really hard. I have a clear conscience that I spent 2 years and $80,000 to try to give all of you the absolute best that we could do. You all in back had an 88-foot buffer. That's unbelievable. I don't think that you'll ever see that again. No development on top of the slope. Again and again, we made concession after concession after concession. Even on the square footage of the house, we went from the neighborhood standard of 10.7 to the 10% that would have come along with a conventional subdivision to the latest, which was a 9%. And I think that that was a very reasonable. I think that there could have been plenty of landscaping put in there. And if you were worried about the streetscape and the view from the street, you moved the house as far as possible as you could toward the street. If that had been the priority, it could have gone way back and been hidden in the woods. No one would have ever seen it if that were the issue.
The only thing, you know, and maybe I missed it, but the only thing I'll leave you with is, I think you saw early on, I went through the last 30 years of cul-de-sacs. I'm not aware of any times that waiver has not been granted, but beyond that, I have at least 3 instances where the town has had the opportunity to connect one street to another street, because the neighbors haven't wanted it. They haven't been connected. So this town historically has gone out of its way not to connect streets, but to do cul-de-sacs. So to my way of thinking, you know, maybe things are going to be substantially different.
But you know what,
Going
Jonathan?
forward.
Back when this was first presented at the very first meeting, and it's now really becoming quite clear to me, it's a pork chop lot. It's just a long driveway. It's not a cul-de-sac. It's a long driveway leading to a house put in someone's backyard. And I really wonder about the number of lots in Weston that probably would want to do the same thing. You know, they're going to leave and they're going to develop their back 40, whatever it might be, even though it's a back acre and a half. And it's just a pork chop lot. And, you know, maybe you could have put in a little cottage back there and snuck it in and not had that big driveway, but have it like looping around. There's a number of ways it could have been done. But really, I think it's now a very bad idea.
The conventional lot is not a pork chop lot.
Right.
By
but that
any
would be-
definition, by any definition.
But
Yeah.
that, to
Yeah,
have
if-
one rammed right in
Yeah.
back of a house, I can just see it happening everywhere. And
Yeah, I
I
would-
just think that's a bad road to go down.
Yeah, I would have thought that this would be preferable to the conventional, but maybe not. But if the town is making that decision, you know, she'll have to decide, looking historically, if there's grounds to change past practice today. But there certainly is other alternatives, and she'll have to explore them.
Again, I don't personally believe that because we commonly grant a waiver, that we're compelled always to grant that waiver.
Well, but it's more than commonly, it's you have always granted.
We have the right to do what we did.
I'm not convinced you do.
The Supreme Court says that you can't single out, and this would be
But
the
anyway,
exact
I don't think you're not
opposite
gonna
of
change your
singling
mind
out.
tonight.
We've
You
already-
also talked about how, like in the case of connecting 2 roads with a new road, that it didn't happen because the town listened to people. And there's been a lot of neighborhood opposition to this plan in spite of all of the changes made over time. It just hasn't been enough. And we have to listen to the abutters, and we have to do what's in the best interest of the town. And that's what we feel we've done.
Okay. All right.
I want to say it was not, this, for me, this was not, you can ask Adrian, I've agonized about this for weeks, actually. So it was not an easy decision.
And this is not blanket denial of a waiver. What this is saying didn't meet the criteria that we felt was needed in order for a waiver to be granted.
No,
So
it's more than
that's
that.
not singling out.
No, but it's more than that. It's saying we will not, you're putting us on notice that if we file for a formal subdivision of this property, that you're going to deny it. That's what I'm hearing tonight. Am I right, Al?
I'm just speaking for myself.
Yeah, but Roy has said the same thing, and I think you've all basically, I guess Roy and Al are the two that have said, we will deny you, effectively, we'll deny you if you come before us with a conventional subdivision here. Okay. So I know 2 of you will anyway.
But we voted to deny the waiver. So.
Yes, which is not quite the same, but it's pretty close to the same. I think we're done.